Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on all matters property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. We're live every Sunday at 10 a.m. on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on the website, please leave us a Google review, and if you're watching on social media, get involved in the conversation in the comments below. If you would like to send us some questions for our regular questions programs that we make, the email address is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you don't have a chance to listen to the show in full because you're on the move, take the podcast with you. The audio version is available every Monday after the Sunday broadcast at 10 a.m. Just search Property Matters TV wherever you get your podcasts from. And the show is also broadcast across the week on Dilsey Radio. So let's have a look at the festive New Year stories. Joe, Happy New Year's Eve.
Yes, Happy New Year. Let's hope this 24 is, a bit more encouraging than the mix of 23. But I think we've got a mixed bag of goodies. Pick and mix, I suppose. What comes to my mind is probably what's going to be the order for 24. But let's see.
Yeah, we're going to look back first on 2023 and also look forward to 2024. Seems appropriate to do that on New Year's Eve of all days. And Zoopla has given us the 23 official data, which is very interesting indeed. It's all about buyer behaviour and user trends in the market, and mortgage rates dominated the market, of course, throughout the year. Homeowners and those looking to buy or move Googled a mortgage-related term almost every 23 seconds in 2023. Latest findings from the property website shows as the result of the Bank of England hiking the rates, of course, from 0.1% to 5.25% in the year. In a bid to tackle soaring inflation, it is little surprise that homeowners have been consumed by what is happening to mortgages. The property portal says that mortgage-related terms have been searched for almost 1 million times, with a 62% increase in searches for the term mortgage rates and a 43% increase in the search for mortgage repayment calculator as homeowners grappled with rising inflation and the cost of living crisis. In tandem, there's also been an increase in searches for when will interest rates go down, 85% increase, and a 43% increase for interest rate predictions as the nation waited to see what the Bank of England would do next. And I suppose really that's how we will remember 2023, isn't it? A battle against the interest rates, Joe.
Yes, I mean, it's quite frightening to think that from 0.1% to 5.25, that was literally a steep curve. It's straight to the top, really. It was just, there was no let up in that, and that caused a huge amount of issues throughout 23. And we'll probably do the same, going forward. It's settling with what I think is the new norm. Home buyers, homeowners, buy to let, anyone that was in property definitely had a very short, sharp shock in the shortest possible time that you can imagine, since 2007, when obviously it all went quiet and then the interest rate started to sort of change to try and make things happen. And then all of a sudden, in one big swoop within a short space of time, we went, literally straight to the top. It's like finding, the shard at the tip. It was just literally straight to the point of the top. But they, as I've always said, they use the property market as a yo-yo to settle. And here is pure demonstration of what happened. In terms of that, they demonstrated by hiking the interest rate. They wanted to bring the inflation down, which they did remarkably well, but at a cost. And on top of that, of course, we all lived through those tremendous hikes in utilities which we didn't bargain for. So yeah, very, very interesting in terms of how that happened. And of course, now the injuries and the fallouts from that.
Certainly feels very much akin to the days of the early 1970s, when we had the 3-day week and all that kind of thing going on. It's the most tough I've remembered since those times. Also tough for first-time buyers, Joe, to get back onto the point, really. Their buying power in the year was hit by 20%, so they had 20% less that they could afford as a result of the mortgage rate hikes. And so as a result of that, they reckon there was 15.5% fewer first-time buyers in the past 12 months from September to 2023. And of course, the fluctuating mortgage rates making affordability central for many homeowners. 2023 was a year that saw the public searching in new ways for their dream home as value became front of mind. And we've got a story coming up in a moment where people are taking longer and longer terms for their mortgages, which is a little risky, given that, you know, you're going to have to carry on paying well into what would be perceived as retirement age. But as you've said before, Joe, without the first-time buyers, we don't have a market.
Yes, I mean, and the first-time buyers have demonstrated. First of all, obviously, it's quite amazing to see the power of search engines and the power of words that actually allow people to give us an indication of how many people are searching and what words they're using and what is really on their minds. And it goes very clearly to show that property is always on people's minds. And when they're searching for mortgages and searching for the way to pay and how long the mortgage is going to be and what's available. That data is really useful and good to share with our listeners and viewers, because it just goes to show that what people are currently thinking. People are always asking me constantly, how's the housing market? What's it doing? And this is what our program's all about. It tells us all the current ways of what people are doing. But first-time buyers are, without a shadow of a doubt, crucial to our whole system. They are very, very keen to still get on the property ladder into the property market. And of course, yes, this idea of long-term mortgages has always been mooted. But obviously, with interest rates gone as high as they are, they have no choice but to try and spread it over a longer period.
Indeed, they say that March was the most popular month for completions for both new homes and existing properties, thanks to a surge in market activity at the beginning of the year. And I think that was people trying to get on the ladder, of course, before they knew the rates were going to go up to 5%, if you remember. Whilst users and sessions, or the user sessions, reached their highest point in July, the average time to sell a property was 34 days. That's up from 25 days last year. So it's taken slightly longer to sell a property. And 3-bed homes remain the most in-demand property for this type of this year, rather, should I say? So it's interesting, isn't it? I actually thought that perhaps it would be a bit longer, because we've said that stock is sticking around a bit more, but still 34 days is pretty fast.
It is, and it's the backlog of what probably could have happened, Paul. I mean, the thing you got to bear in mind is that we've come into this. There were certain things that were already in the system which they wanted to proceed and clear up. But the new stuff is this was what slowed down, and that's where the time will show in 24 as a longer period, as opposed to what it was before. But 34 days for a property to be on the market and to be sold or to have a buyer is still pretty good. And that just tells you that the interest in the property market will continue and has continued. In spite of what's happened with the interest rates and the utility bills and so forth, because people want to. I mean, we've covered lots and lots of things in the buy-to-let market and the rental market, and when you think what the rentals are and what people are paying, obviously it's still in their best interest, where they can afford to take a mortgage and take a longer view over it, because it's probably, at least it's their own property and they're putting some energy into their own as opposed to just renting. But that has become a very big challenge, especially from the hike of 0.1% up to 5.25.
So looking at what people were searching on Zoopla, freehold was the top keyword search, which is hardly surprising with all the publicity around leasehold and the reform that's due in due course. And that moved from third place last year to first place. Annex also moved up one spot to third place. Perhaps reflecting the growing trend of intergenerational living for many families, putting their budgets together to try and afford something. As a third of UK households are classed as multi-generational, garage remained in the top 3 of lists of keyword searches that, as it did in 2022. So basically, the most popular were freehold, garage, annex, acre, garden, pool, interestingly, cottage, rural, sea view, and en-suite. Pretty much shows the British passion for property, doesn't it, Joe, across all areas there, really?
Yes, I mean, some of that is retirement, some of it is because families are getting together, especially when you get, garage, ensuite. Some of those garages have are converted, especially if they are integrated into the property to create extra space. Those are all the areas and angles people think about and looking at. And of course, three bedrooms is primarily become very popular because people are sharing now, Paul. A lot of people have started to share again, going back to that sort of 70s, 80s, and 90s when things get tough. What happens is that people say, okay, well, I've got a box room or I've got a double room which I'm not using, or we can switch around and we can actually get a sharer in, and that will help the burden of the monthly bills, etc. So that's why three bedrooms are always popular. But yes, freehold, quite honestly, as you say, because of the the renters reform and then also the leasehold policies, the leasehold changes. People are conscious. They want to be an owner of something that they think is got longevity and is theirs as a freehold.
So looking at the list of the top 10 houses that were looked at, so the most viewed top 10 of the year, 7 out of the 10 were affordable family homes or doer-uppers. Only 3 homes on the list were multi-million pound properties, indicating that 2023 was the year that many homeowners became realistic about what they can afford and therefore what they have been viewing. Recent Zoopla data revealed that the most affordable town to purchase property in Britain is Cumnock in Scotland, based on a price to earnings ratio. However, another Scottish area Inverclyde takes the top spot as the cheapest local authority in the UK, with an average house price of 103,200, Joe.
Wow. Well, in London, you might get a garage for that. So that tells you where we are in the disparity of the north and the south.
Funny you should mention that, because in the very next paragraph, they talk about the average price in London, which is 1.210 million, so 1.2 million for an average property. And the most expensive house sold in the UK in 2023 was a huge £36.5 million.
Wow, there you go.
It is interesting, isn't it, how these portals, obviously, because they are able to, monitor everything that people do, it really does give you an insight into our house buying nation.
Oh, definitely. And as I said, I mean, whilst the portals have changed the way people now look and shop and so forth, the amount of data that they collect is sort of real-time data. And obviously that's what we're able to share with our listeners and our viewers, that, these things are designed to understand, and they designed to make changes. And then changes are happening, on the spot all the time. I mean, you think that was typed out the most, it clearly tells you what the mindset of people are. They're thinking, more laterally and logically, saying, I want to buy, but I want to buy something that's freehold. And of course, like mortgages, we know that is an inquiry level that is very high of them thinking that they want to buy. So these are all telltale signs of where the market will go.
They do mention the fact that UK house prices have fallen much less than expected, despite the fact that we've got 5% interest rates. And it means purchasing a property still remains relatively expensive for an average household. It is interesting, and it is I'm not sure why, but have you got an opinion why you think house prices haven't fallen further, given it's so unaffordable for many?
Well, I think two or three things that I've thought about here. One is that the house prices went up quite a lot between 2019 and 2022. So there was a huge rush during this pandemic and the race for space. A lot of people did move at that time, and the housing market was very busy, and so they are settled. And so not as much movement has happened since then. And because there's not as much movement, there are not so many changes in prices. And I can relate to that when I go back to 2007, 2008, when, the financial crash happened. Between 2007, 2008 and 2014, which is probably when the housing market first saw any light, there was no real change in the house prices. And the reason for it was because nobody was moving. And I think that's really where we've come to now, that people are just not making that sort of commitment to move immediately. So the house prices haven't dipped, though the media would love it to actually dip so they can actually sell more media on bad news. Nevertheless, the little bit of bad news they do get, i.e. house prices are, either correcting or downturn, 3 or 4 or 5%, if that, is what they want to utilize and say house prices are falling. But here, clearly, our data shows that it's not as drastic as one likes to think. However, borrowing money is becoming more and more challenging, and that's probably what's going to be the question in 24. And that's where I think it will become the buyer's market as opposed to a seller's market. And part of those are political reasons, which we will underline and see throughout 24.
Super are suggesting that mortgage rates will drop to 4.5% by the end of next year, and then therefore they expect house prices to remain negative, with prices down 2% next year. A faster fall in mortgage rates, say down to 4%, would boost sales activity, but not necessarily house prices. Do you agree with all of that?
Yes, I mean, house purchases will continue. I don't think there won't be as many, but they will continue because that's the way people don't always buy for investment. There are people that are buying because they have to buy, they have to move, because maybe job changes are happening, social reasons, kids schooling, all those other underlying factors that bring people into the market and have to. And not everybody is mortgaged up to the hilt, so they're not always worried about what that is. They might be that they've already owned it and paid for it outright, and their circumstances mean they've got to downsize or they've got to upgrade or whatever. So housing will always continue to move. It may not be at the levels that we like it to be, but it will continue to do so. And money will get tighter for a while. I'm not sure so much about the interest rates coming back. Of course, I think there will be probably fixed rates being offered around maybe 4.5, 4.75 in order to tempt the market coming back. But I'm not quite convinced at the moment that they will actually bring it down to somewhere around 4.5. I think it may stay around 5%.
Time will tell. We alluded to our next story a moment ago, so let's just take a look at it. 1/5 of first-time buyers taking out mortgages of more than 35 years in order to get on the housing ladder, according to UK Finance. In its Finance Review Q3 report, the Banking and Financial Services Trade Association revealed the lengths many people are going to in order to afford a home amid higher borrowing costs. The number of first-time buyers taking out over 35-year mortgages jumped to 20% in September, rising from just 13% in September. According to the review, the number of first-time buyers that have taken out 30 to 35-year mortgages stood at 36% in August and September, down from 37% in comparison to the previous year. Both 30 to 35-year and over mortgages take-ups have jumped dramatically amongst first-time buyers since records began in April 2005, where they stood at 5% and 2% respectively. So overall, 56% of first-time buyers in September 2023 took out a mortgage of over 30 years, with 33% of movers taking out over 30-year mortgages. Lending to both first-time buyers and movers has fallen year on year since December 2022. They also found that 9% took mortgages of over 35 years. That is a big risk, isn't it? Because, if you're talking about buying a house around the age of 30, let's just say, then you're going to be 70 odd, aren't you, if you have 40 years?
Yes, I mean, the thing is, the purpose for this 30 to 35-year term is more about affordability and spreading the cost. I don't think it's generally about them living in that one place for that period. And chances are, there used to be a scenario that people used to move every 3 to 4 years. Now I think it's probably 5 to 7 years. So they may take a 35-year mortgage term, which allows them to spread the cost over a longer period. However, the chances are most people will probably in the next 3 to 5 years after they take the mortgage consider moving out or changing, and then their circumstances change. They're not going to stay the same, and then maybe they will readjust theirs to maybe a 25-year term going forward. And also it depends on what equity or capital gains they actually make on the property. So let's say they bought something for £100,000, and now in year 4 or 5 or 6, it's now worth £200,000 or £150,000. They've now managed to get some equity, which would be down as a bigger payment towards perhaps the next mortgage, and so subsequently that would then bring the borrowing down, and of course maybe the term down as well. But I think in September the reason why most of it happened is because with all the interest rates that have been going up during 23, it has made it impossible for people to have the affordability within the 25-year term.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other thing people are doing to cut the monthly cost is what they're saying here. The interest-only mortgage, of course, has come back with a large rise in people seeking an interest-only term. But that comes with risks, doesn't it really, Joe?
Well, the problem with interest only is very simple. There's no real way of repaying the actual amount that you're borrowing. So, it's an age-old thing that back in the day they had endowment policies which never performed, and since then it really hasn't happened. So now people just had to go for a capital repayment and interest mortgage, which means that the mortgage payments are high, but at least they're hitting into the amount borrowing that they're doing if they're going to stay in one place or staying for a longer period, and can afford the affordability. But those that can't, then of course they're coming back to interest only again to get the first rung on this the ladder to be able to start motivating, and they could readjust that. It might be that they fix the interest only mortgage for the first 3 to 5 years and then redo it again, and change it perhaps to a repayment.
I suppose there is an element of them that thinks, maybe if we ended up with sort of inflation and growth like we did in the 70s and early 80s, whereby properties were rocketing each year, therefore, because the one thing about an interest only, of course, is that your property that you're buying, or not buying as the case, but paying the interest on, is going up in value. So there will be a benefit in the long term, but it probably won't be enough to afford something smaller when you come to nearer to retirement.
Yes, absolutely, Paul. I mean, that's exactly what they sort of count on. We always count on it and think, okay, well, I'll take an interest-only mortgage in the next 5 years. I bought it for 100,000. It might be worth 200,000 or 300,000. I could probably downsize, pay off, and then have a mortgage-free house, perhaps somewhere in the country. These are all what we call ideals, but something we can't control about is life. We don't know what it's going to throw at you, and you might think you've got a plan, and all of a sudden that plan has been thrown right out of the water, and you're staying where you are, or you can't afford to stay where you are. But yes, the ideal thing is that the capital growth of the value over a period should be a good way of thinking. Well, actually, if it comes to the end of my term, 30 odd years later, 35 years odd later, then maybe what I have to do is just sell my property, clear off, and then buy with whatever's left as a balance. I mean, one of the things that they've got to think about, I suppose, going forward is carrying your mortgage with you wherever you go to another property, and therefore that could help. In the US, they definitely have that process where basically you have a mortgage and you could actually, almost make it portable to the next property and the next property and the next property, if you so wish to, so that you're not having to switch lenders and repay and go through the whole process again. But there must be a reason why we can't do that, or it doesn't work for our people.
So where do you think, Joe, the happiest place to live is in Britain? It's a new survey from Rightmove this time. We've had Zoopla on the show, now we've got Rightmove on the show. Britain's happiest place to live apparently is Richmond in London. It's the number one spot this year. Winchester came second. Monmouth even in Wales came third, which is the first time anywhere from Wales has been in the top three since 2018. And Galashiels is the happiest place to live in Scotland. The Happy at Home Index asks residents how they feel about their area based on 13 happiness factors. It was completed this year by over 26,000 people. I guess if you can afford a property in Richmond, you're going to be pretty happy.
Well, look, Richmond is idyllic to a large extent, and that's probably why it's come at that sort of spot. There are so many idyllic locations around, but being by the river and having Richmond Park and all those other bits that go with it, it kind of dovetails, and it sits on the fringes of London, so you've got the best of both worlds, really. And yeah, I drive through Richmond, and it's a very, very pleasant place to be in, but going through. So not surprising that it's hit that sort of spot. It's always been within the top five anyway, in stockbroker belt terms, communication, travel, all of those things. And yes, that's what pushes the prices up, because supply and demand is the bit that pushes the prices and the demand of the kind of properties that they are. But it's good to see Wales creeping in there as well. Generally, these things are quite interesting. That it's how people judge it, and it's also interesting when the surveys are done. What are the reasons why people tick these boxes? And I go back to the points that it's always about what we see and like, and it feels good to ourselves. And I often say to sellers, if you live in a road that people drive through and look around and go, this is a nice location, I'd like to live here, it's because the road has been well catered for in the area. And that's the thing with Richmond. You can drive around Richmond and it's quite leafy, and they've looked after their exteriors, which makes it an area that people want to live in.
And of course, you've got the river running through the middle, which is always very nice. A study found that a feeling of a sense of pride, belonging, and community is most likely to contribute to feeling happy to live in an area, more so than having access to things like public transport, schools, and job opportunities. One of the key trends to emerge from the year's study is that living in rural areas are more likely to be happy than they would be living in a city. Especially if you're living near somewhere like a national park or an area of outstanding natural beauty. Those who live in a rural environment, for example, in the countryside or villages, were more likely to say they were happy where they live rather than residents of an urban or suburban city or town area. Delving deeper into the findings, residents who live near woodland, mountains or coast or a river were more likely to be happy in their area than those who were in a built-up area. The analysis showed that having access to nature and green spaces is more important to residents than having access to public transport, shops and restaurants and employment. Interestingly, around 1 in 3, 30% of residents said that they would be happier living somewhere else. Now that's an interesting point, isn't it?
Well, I think the terminology "the grass looks greener on the other side" comes to my mind on something like that. And so yeah, when you go somewhere else, you always think, "Oh, I'd like to live there and live in a nice area or a remote country area, or by the river or by the sea." All of those things are, as you said in your comments there, are the reasons why people want to move. And I think it's always about finance, circumstances, and aspiration. Aspiration of saying, well, I'd like to move somewhere else because it's nicer, or I can afford it, or it's closer to family, or all of those reasons that we sometimes perhaps don't even bring into our mind, but they are the reasons why people tend to move. And so yes, it's quite a high percentage that most people want to go somewhere else, because I think it's just how you're made to feel where you are. You sort of want the change, and it looks nicer elsewhere. But the cost of moving sometimes deter those lovely dreams that we'd like to achieve.
Most people who weren't happy where they were said they'd like to be in the southwest, Joe. About 35% of those who think they'd be happier living in a different area or planning to move in are planning to move in the next year. So yeah, Southwest is a popular choice. Moving to a bigger home, 28%. That's what they wanted to do. Looking for better value for money, 27%. Wanting a change of lifestyle, 24%. And changes in personal circumstances were reasons for people to move, and they came high on that list as well. Downsizing, 11%. Reducing energy costs 10%, and taking advantage of remote working to live somewhere new were other factors for those planning a move. And I suppose that's one thing, isn't it? Of course, still plenty of people who are now realizing that their company is going to say, well, yes, you can work from home 3 or 4 days a week. That then thinks, well, where am I going to do that? I've been doing it in the kitchen for the last couple of years, because that's, we were waiting to see what the company was going to do, but now it's an official thing and it's part of their DNA as a company. You think, well, I better find somewhere with an office.
Yes, or bigger house, which is probably why the 3-bedroom policy comes into it, because they can always turn the little room into a study or an office. Is that flexibility that people are looking for. But it's interesting that working from home and working out in the country is now 9%, where 2 years ago that was probably much higher, especially with the pandemic. Everybody was running away. But there's a huge demand now of people wanting to go back to work, to the office, through mental health issues and through remoteness and isolation. People prefer to have company or be around other people. so they can bounce off and work with, the ideas of what other colleagues are doing, so that they can actually, integrate. And that's a huge thing now, of course. But I'm surprised that the number is as low as 9%. I thought it would be much higher than that.
Well, one thing's for sure, we should be here looking at property matters again in 2024. Happy New Year to all of our viewers and listeners. Happy New Year to you as well, Joe. I hope it's a prosperous one for us in 2024. We'll see you again soon for some more property matters.